Imagine living the same trauma over and over and over again. Not metaphorically, but literally. That is the life of Subaru Natsuki. Return by death isn't some overpowered fantasy skill. It is repeated loss on loop, and the psychological toll is brutal. Today, we're unpacking how those repeated deaths change Subaru's mind. The trauma, the dissociation, the moral fractures, and the way the power both saves and slowly erodes him. Section 1. What is Return by Death? Subaru's ability, which he calls Return by Death, forces him back to a fixed checkpoint every time he dies. He remembers everything that happened, but the world rewinds. He experiences the full emotional weight of each death over and over, while everyone else has no memory of the loop at all. It's one thing to die in fiction. It's another to carry the memories of hundreds of thousands of deaths. For context, Subaru dies repeatedly throughout the series, dozens of times throughout the anime arcs, and many more in the novels and web serials. Section 2. The immediate psychological impact. Every time Subaru dies, he experiences acute trauma and grief. He loses people he's bonded with, sometimes in gruesome, intimate ways, and then is forced to watch them live again as if nothing happened, which produces nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and intense guilt. Classic symptoms associated with PTSD and trauma. Clinical descriptions of PTSD note re-experiencing the events through flashbacks, insomnia, guilt, and social withdrawal, all of which Subaru displays at various points. Crucially, Subaru can't openly grieve in a sustained way because time rewinds and nobody else remembers, which compounds the pain. His trauma is private, cumulative, and never socially validated. Section 3. Learned helplessness. One of the clearest psychological patterns in Subaru's arc is learned helplessness. When an organism faces repeated, uncontrollable, aversive events, it can learn that actions don't change outcomes and stop trying. Subaru often tries, fails, and dies, sometimes multiple times in the same loop. And that repeated failure can produce a cognitive shift, expecting failure even when an escape exists. This is the core of learned helplessness as described in psychological research. Repeated uncontrollable shocks lead to passivity and depression. In an early arc with Elsa, Subaru repeatedly dies despite trying new things. The result isn't only trauma. It's a creeping sense that nothing he does matters unless he gets lucky or discovers an invisible variable. That expectation warps decision making. It's why at times he panics or freezes, and why he sometimes takes reckless gambles to test the system. Section 4. Dissociation and isolation. Repeated trauma often produces dissociation, a psychological defense where the person feels detached from reality or from a coherent sense of self. Clinically, dissociative symptoms include depersonalization and derealization, feeling as if the world is a dream or you are outside your own body. Subaru exhibits these at times. He starts to feel like he's watching events rather than living in them, especially after gruesome deaths. More than that, his sense of identity becomes fractured. Which Subaru is real? The one who dies and remembers, or the one who gets to live on in the reset world? This identity fracture has narrative consequences. It isolates him. He can't fully inhabit a single timeline. When he forms attachment, they are always threatened by the knowledge that they may be destroyed again. That is existential loneliness at scale. Section 5. Moral injury and the burden of knowledge. Subaru's memory burden also produces moral injury, the sense of having violated one's moral code, or being forced into impossible choices that haunt you. He often has to choose whose life to save, or he must endure the knowledge that more action may save more people, but at a terrible cost. This creates guilt that doesn't wash away with time because why the world forgets, Subaru does not. That's why he repeatedly self-blames, and why many of his worst actions are attempts at preventing harm that never fully succeed. After failures where his attempt to save people result in grotesque deaths, Subaru internalizes responsibility even when the cause is beyond his control. The private, cumulative nature of that guilt is a key driver in his psychological decline at several points in the story. Section 6. coping mechanisms and denial. To survive psychologically and strategically, Subaru develops coping mechanisms, rehearsed behavior, trying the same tactic with small variations, meticulous planning between loops, and a kind of clinical detachment that helps him make hard decisions. These are adaptive. They let him test variables and gather information without letting momentary panic decide outcomes, but they are also costly. Over-optimization breeds cold rationality. And over time, Subaru's empathy and spontaneity can erode if he clings only to strategies that produce survival. That tension, planning versus retaining humanity, becomes a recurring moral question. Is it acceptable to sacrifice your emotional openness if it means saving lives? ReZero forces Subaru and us to reckon with that trade-off. Section 7. Narrative purpose and comparisons. From a storytelling perspective, Return by Death does several things at once. Externalizes psychological suffering as a literal mechanic, it forces trial and error character development, and it makes the stakes visceral. Every loss has real, repeatedly felt consequences. It also asks difficult ethical questions. What does it mean to bear knowledge nobody else has? Is it right to manipulate people for their own good? The mechanic refuses easy answers, and that's part of why Subaru is such a compelling protagonist. The show's depiction lines up with several real psychological concepts: trauma, PTSD, dissociation, and the list goes on. This framework helps explain why Subaru sometimes behaves in ways that feel self-destructive or incomprehensible. Remember, this power doesn't simply make Subaru a hero. Subaru is a human being that is repeatedly broken down and rebuilt. Return by Death is less a superpower and more of a chronic trauma. It gives knowledge and survival, but extracts an incessant psychological tax. Subaru's story isn't about becoming stronger in the usual sense. It's about surviving the unbearable and still choosing to continue forward. If you enjoy my anime analysis, subscribe and comment ReZero.